is expecting less than that due to the pandemic, but we still hope to have collected around 30 million by the end of this year. Johnny's going to drop a link into the chat with the CPF page on our website. When you have a chance, I recommend bookmarking this page because we'll continue to add more information to it as the work on our fund develops. Taylor, you can go to the next slide. Right, thank you. So our office is charged with setting the city's climate policies and developing programs that advance Denver's ambitious climate goals. Officially, the city's goal is to reduce emissions 80% by 2050, but we are actively working to determine what it would take to change that to eliminating all emissions by 2040. That is the recommendation that the Climate Action Task Force challenged us with last year. And again, Johnny's going to drop another link into the chat where you can access that report. So the ordinance that created this fund charges our office with administering it. That includes developing the rules which interpret how the money can be spent, developing a 5-year plan for the fund, which is due this November, 1 year after the ballot initiative was passed by the voters, and submitting annual reports on how the money was spent and what the impacts were in terms of emissions and equity metrics. Taylor, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this evening's presentation will focus on how your organizations can prepare for applying to the Climate Protection Fund to support climate-focused projects that are important to your community. But before we get into that, it's important to note that the fund can and will also support projects for the city and county of Denver. We will give examples throughout the presentation. Although we can provide support for city projects, the money from this fund cannot be used to replace funding from other sources that is already dedicated to projects in development. A good example of that are city projects to add bike lanes, which are already funded by other dollars. So our colleagues in the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, which we call DOTI, we may say that one again, they can't ask the Climate Protection Fund for money for those projects. Pardon me. The Climate Protection Fund is called a special revenue fund, and the city has a number of them. One of our tasks as an agency is to make sure that the spending plan for the Climate Protection Fund is focused on climate-specific objectives and not to duplicate the intent of other funds. The CPF has the potential to overlap with the funds listed here, so it's an important distinction that we need to establish this year. One example I can give you is access to healthy food. We know that urban agriculture and community gardens can improve the resiliency of many communities by providing sustainable access to healthy food. Those types of projects, oh, my screen just changed, I'm sorry. Those types of projects can receive funding through the Healthy Food for Denver Kids program. So one question we're asking ourselves is, should such projects also qualify for funding through the Climate Protection Fund? Or is that duplication not the best use of these dollars? We have not yet answered this question or others like it. So the input you give us this evening in the chat or by emailing us later will help inform our decisions. Now I'm going to turn it over to Liz Babcock to walk us through the 6 allowable uses of the fund.
Thanks, Grace. So as you all have heard, the Climate Protection Fund was created by an ordinance and it was approved by the voters. For this reason, we're only allowed to spend money in the categories listed in the ballot language. These are the 6 allowable uses: workforce development, renewable energy and batteries, neighborhood-based environmental and climate justice, adaptation and resiliency programs, sustainable transportation, and efficiency upgrades to buildings and homes. Next slide, please, Taylor. So I'm going to talk through each of those 6 allowable uses to give you a little bit more information. The first allowable use is workforce development. The specific language from the ordinance is job creation through local workforce training and new careers in clean energy technology and management of natural resources. On the right, under examples, we have things like outreach to reduce barriers to entry for people who are seeking to, to pursue new careers, reskilling or upskilling in areas that are related to clean energy, resource management, and paid training, pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship program. And those could include pre-apprentice or apprentice programs in weatherizing homes, electrification, EV charging infrastructure, that's electric vehicle charging infrastructure, solar installation, or natural areas restoration. This is not a complete list, and we will continue to work with many partners to develop new ideas that fit within this allowable use. Next slide, Taylor. The second allowable use is increased investments in solar power, battery storage, and other renewable energy technology. One example of a project we've already decided to fund is our community solar garden project. Community solar allows you to sign up to get credits on your utility bill while the solar is hosted at another location. This is great for renters or those who don't have the right rooftop to host solar. Denver will install solar on 9 city facilities starting this year and completing around the end of 2022. The greenhouse gas reductions are significant. 10% of the power will be provided to income qualified households with no subscription fee, which will reduce their monthly electric bills and provide access to solar power. Other possibilities include rebates for rooftop solar or support for waste heat capture or renewable district energy systems. Next slide, please, Taylor. The third allowable use is neighborhood-based environmental and climate justice programs. I think there's a lot of room for creativity in this space, and this is where we really need to hear from you. Some possibilities we've thought of include community-based needs assessments, which could be something like where the community, where we're actually going out into the community to have conversations with community leaders, with residents about what needs they have that would fit under the various allowable uses of the fund, as well as what resources or organizations or assets already exist in that community that we could partner with to implement programs. We could invest in outreach or promotora type of programs where we work with community leaders to design their own outreach and education programs to reach residents in the community where they are and to get them access to the programs that we might provide. And we also believe that we can fund projects that reduce both greenhouse gas emissions as well as other toxic air pollutants. Next slide, please, Taylor. The fourth allowable use category is adaptation and resiliency programs that help vulnerable communities prepare for a changing climate. We know that Denver's future climate will be significantly different from the past. We did not have a need for cooling and rarely experienced days over 90 degrees, let alone 95 or 100. Today, those temperatures are common and it will get hotter in the future. Our planning needs to account for our climate risks and vulnerabilities and start making investments today to help those most vulnerable prepare. Along with temperature increases, we may also see prolonged drought, extreme weather such as hail, bomb cyclones, or heavy rainfall that causes flooding. We need to prepare now for those changes. We also know that increased pollution from wildfires will affect everyone, but especially those with health conditions that make them more vulnerable. 50% of Denver homes don't have cooling. So along with extreme heat risk, we also need to add cooling to provide better filtered indoor air. A few possibilities for programs to support include green infrastructure in communities that would include trees, other green spaces, places that can absorb extreme rainfall and are resilient to those kind of extreme weather events. Cooling that is powered with renewable energy. Community climate risk assessments for small businesses or residents. We know, for example, that many small businesses are underinsured or uninsured, and they can't afford the impacts that an extreme hail event, for example, might have on them. We also need and want your ideas for projects. Next slide, please, Taylor. The fifth allowable use is programs and services that provide affordable, clean, safe, and reliable transportation choices like walking, biking, transit, electric vehicles, and neighborhood scale transit. I'm excited to tell you that we've already made one funding commitment in this category. We are providing funding to 2 nonprofit organizations that will create e-bike, electric bike, lending libraries in Sun Valley, Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea. In total, there will be 70 e-bikes, all manufactured in Sun Valley. They will be free to essential workers to help them get to and from work easier, and for residents to run errands without relying on RTD's bus service, which we know has been severely limited during the pandemic. We know transportation infrastructure is costly, far higher than what the fund could support alone. So we're interested to hear from you about how to invest dollars in transportation that would be high impact for greenhouse gas and pollution reduction, as well as providing equity benefits. Some of our thoughts are listed here as examples, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Next slide, please, Taylor. Finally, we come to the sixth allowable use: upgrade the energy efficiency of homes, offices, and industry to reduce their carbon footprint, utility bills, and indoor air pollution. Buildings and homes account for over 60% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. We know that fossil gas appliances leak toxic fumes into the spaces where we spend 90% of our time. We also know that we have an opportunity to eliminate carbon pollution and other harmful emissions, lower energy bills, and create high road jobs and build community wealth. We're hoping to do energy upgrades in at least 200 units of affordable housing in the first year of the fund, and there is so much more we will be able to do in the years to come. Some other examples would be rebates for converting gas-fired furnaces to electric heat pumps, support of district sewer heat recovery, and wraparound income qualified housing retrofits that would include efficiency, weatherization, and electrification. Now we're going to take a break for some polling questions. So I think my colleague Johnny will drop the link to the Menti poll in the chat one more time. If you're already in the Menti poll in your browser, that's great. The new question should pop up for you. If you haven't yet accessed Menti, you can click on that link right there in the chat and it'll take you right to the poll. Or you can, if the link isn't working for you, you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code on the top of the slide. So this question is, please use the slider to indicate the importance of each of the 6 allowable uses to your community. On the left-hand side is less important and the right-hand side is very important. The first is workforce development, then renewable energy and batteries, neighborhood-based environmental and climate justice, adaptation and resiliency programs, transportation, and energy efficiency of buildings and homes. And we'll just let you all take a minute to put in your answers. We're seeing the responses come in live here. We have about 30 responses, which is great. Seeing a lot of support for energy efficiency in homes and renewable energy. Looks like there's a good amount of support for all of the allowable uses, which is great to see. We have about 44 responses, so just another minute and then we'll close the poll. So get your answers in now, weigh in. What is most important to you? Buildings and homes is in the lead. Okay, great. We'll go ahead and close that poll and you can see the results there. The next question that we have is, how important are each of these outcomes? On the left-hand side is least important, on the right-hand side is most important. An environmentally just Denver, meeting our climate greenhouse gas reduction goals, reducing local air pollution other than greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptability to a changing climate. Go ahead and start entering your responses there. Taylor, I'm not seeing the live. Is it coming in, or maybe it's not coming in right now? Usually we start seeing the live response in here, but maybe that's not happening with this one.
Let's see, it might show up when I close it.
Okay.
So I will.
So it'll be a big surprise at the end.
Let's hope that's how this one works.
Okay. All right. Good. Looks like we have about 55 responses. So just 10 more seconds and then we'll go ahead and close the poll and hopefully we can see those final results for everybody.
All right.
2, 1.
I don't know. We'll have to take a look at this one.
Okay. Well, we'll figure out what happened and maybe we can, oh, there they come. There they are.
Thank you.
Oh, it said something like results are hidden. There we go. Now we can see it. All right. So looks like they're all relatively important to you all, with the GHG reduction kind of edging out the others just by a bit. All right. Next question. In one word, so this is going to be a word cloud at the end, which is really cool. In one word, what does success for the fund look like to you? So if you could just pick one word, type that in and it will generate a word cloud at the end so we can see what everybody's thinking. We've got about 30, 40 some answers. And looks like there's some great words coming in here. Just give it a little bit more time. So go ahead and type in your one word to the poll and we will close it here in just a few moments. Okay, we'll go ahead and close it. I'm seeing justice, equity, and sustainable and resiliency kind of as the 4 biggest. And then we've got some other great words around here. Green, bliss, clean air, accountability, environmental justice, healthy, livability, zero emissions. So this is amazing. This is really going to help us think about what is most important to you all. So let's see, I just have to go back and see. So now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Sunrisa, to talk about the criteria that we will use for funding.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Can you hear me okay? I feel
Yes.
like I'm getting an echo, so I'm going to try this. Can you still hear me okay now? All right, great.
Yes.
So thank you, Liz, very much. And thank you everyone for your feedback on these priority areas for spending the fund. And you still cannot see me, can you? Let's try that. There we go.
Yeah.
All righty. So let's see, we have been and are going to continue to get some great ideas on how to spend the fund, but we need a way to evaluate those ideas. Some of them are already laid out for us in the ordinance that created the fund, and some our office needs to develop. This slide is outlining, outlining the requirements that are the non-negotiable ways in which the fund can be spent. First and foremost, the CPF must support the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions air pollution, and or help Denver adapt to climate change. Once a project meets that standard, it must be within one of the 6 allowable uses that Liz described. And while not every project will have to meet this final requirement, overall, at least 50% of the fund will have to be spent on projects with a strong lens towards equity, race, and social justice. And truthfully, our office is going to be applying this lens to all of our projects. And while every single project we fund may not directly benefit the people and communities most burdened by climate change, this 50% requirement is a minimum investment and not a maximum. And it is one that we are going to be seeking to exceed. So there's one other level, next slide, please, Taylor. There's one other type of criteria that we will also be developing, and those are, and by which we'll be evaluating proposals. We are imagining that these criteria will be in the areas of impact, or how significantly a project is meeting the objectives of the fund, how well it applies a lens for equity, race, and social justice, and making sure that it complies with all federal, state, and local laws. For example, we can't administer grants, and nor can we fund lobbying. This slide on the right is showing one example of our approach to drafting these type of project criteria. Here we imagine a project that is on workforce, under the workforce allowable use category. These are examples of performance-based criteria of how we could begin to evaluate a workforce project. We may not just think about the quantity of the jobs that are created, but also the quality of them. For example, are they paying a living wage, or are they unionized if they're able to be? We can also ask questions related to equity, such as, is the job accessible for those living in a targeted neighborhood or in a targeted group, such as those in a transition industry. All of these criteria presented here are just ideas. Nothing has been determined yet, nor do we have some of these key terms defined. And that's because we want the input of others on what this criteria should be. Next slide, please. That is why stakeholder engagement and partnership are intrinsic to who we are. Our office was actually initially the idea of Resilient Denver, a group of Denver climate activists. And I see a couple of them on our call even tonight. And that idea was brought to life through a negotiation between them, the mayor, and city council. Likewise, the 2A ballot initiative that created the Climate Protection Fund was passed through a coalition of environmental and social justice advocates in partnership with the mayor and council. As a city agency, it is routine for us to discuss our plans with the mayor, city council, and other colleagues in other departments. Our work is interdisciplinary and it cannot be achieved by our office alone. And therefore we must work in partnership with others across the city. And that goes for the community too. So we meet regularly with advocacy organizations, and not just environmental advocates, but also social justice groups, community-based organizations that offer a wide range of services to residents, registered neighborhood organizations, DPS, small businesses through our Certifiably Green Denver program, and many, many others. So in this remote only time, while we can still hold some types of public meetings like this one, and in some ways virtual meetings have improved attendance. And I can't remember a public meeting pre-COVID where we had over 80 people in the room. But that said, we know that this platform still doesn't get to everybody, which is why our efforts don't stop with just here. So next slide, please. One important formal engagement effort that we have is the Sustainability Advisory Council. This council was first created for the Greenprint Denver office under former Mayor Hickenlooper. The council has taken many forms over the years, and CASR took this opportunity to restructure it both to provide more opportunities for people to be formally engaged and to continue the successful experience we had with the Climate Action Task Force in 2020. This graphic shows our Knights of the Round composition of the Sustainability Advisory Council. The 2 co-chairs of our 6 different committees are members of the council, along with 2 other at-large members. And these members are all appointed by the mayor. There is one final person that is also a member of the council, and that is from City Council and appointed by the City Council President, Stacy Gilmore. Councilman Cashman is the current City Council representative on our council. The committees have all met this past month, and the Sustainability Advisory Council will have its first meeting next week on Cinco de Mayo, on the 5th of May, from 3 to 5 p.m. The meetings are available to watch on Facebook Live, and the links will also be available on our website. And we will also be posting recordings of those meetings there. So if you miss it, you can catch it afterward. Next slide, please. This slide shows the structure of our council. And for the benefit of our interpreters, I'm going to go ahead and read the names of our committees. We have 6 committees: the Science and Research Committee, the Community Adaptation, Resiliency, and Environmental Justice Committee, Energy, Sustainable Transportation, Resource Management, and Buildings and Homes. And then each of these committees has a staff liaison that supports their work. So the intent is for the bulk of the work, our big discussions and debates, to be conducted at the committee level. The conversations with the council and its committees are intended to be a two-way street. As much as we're going to be presenting to them our ideas for the fund, such as the evaluation criteria, these representatives also will come to the table with their own ideas and recommendations. We welcome you all here as well to continue emailing us after the presentation with your ideas, and we will be sure to share those with the Sustainability Advisory Council and the committees for their deliberations. And if you would like someone from one of these committees to follow up with you, and more than just a message to us, please let us know, drop it in the chat or email us later, and we'll connect you with someone from one of those committees. And then specific to the Climate Protection Fund, also, everything we're presenting to you this evening is going to be discussed at length at those committees. And Johnny's going to drop a link into the chat for our Sustainability Advisory Council webpage, so you can read more about it and see who the people are on each of the committees. Thank you, Johnny. All righty, and now that brings us home to our final slide here. None of these structures that we discussed are enough. We recognize that we can't always expect people to come to us, and at times we have to go to them. Or actually maybe even all the time, we should be going to them. And so part of my regular job duties are to spend time with these community organizations, with people like you all and the organizations that you represent, and try to get to know their scope of work and collaborate with them to identify how our mission can support their mission and how the Climate Protection Fund could be a benefit to their work. I'm excited to dig into this effort and to get to know each of you and your organizations better. And I'm happy to meet with folks over the phone in virtual meetings or socially distanced meetups, coffees, teas, those kinds of fun beveragey things. And have some face-to-face conversations as well, now that we're seeing the light at the end of this COVID tunnel, hopefully. And now also that the weather is getting nicer. So together we can work to identify where our work overlaps and where there are opportunities to partner. We would love your thoughts on the criteria for the fund and how we can apply principles like the ones I'm showing here on this slide, such as targeted universalism, human-centered design, and there's others too. We've talked about centering the most impacted and transactional versus transformative relationships. So I'd love to get into deeper conversations about what these terms mean and what they look like for your organizations. And with that, you know, we want to hear from you too. So we take advantage of these opportunities to get your opinions as well. And so with that, I have a mentee poll and a few questions of my own. So if you don't mind going, Johnny, dropping the link again into the chat. Thank you very much. If we can all go back to the mentee page, I have a couple new questions for you. So the first one is, what is one project you would like to see funded in year one of the Climate Protection Fund? And 10 words or less, please, or, you know, keep it cute, keep it concise. And if another language is your more comfortable language, feel free to answer in that language as well. All right, we see a few ideas coming through. Here we go. And as we get more and more ideas here, we recognize not everybody will be able to keep up with being able to read all the ideas, but it is great for us to see that there's a lot of creativity in our community here, and we will be sharing the results of this poll on our website. So if you can't read super fast now, don't worry about it. It'll be posted later. And this information really does help inform us as well. And likewise, I don't want our translators to have to, you know, work into overdrive trying to read all of this. We went a little free form here, so I'll keep giving you a few more, maybe 30 more seconds to finish your thoughts. Excellent. These are really great ideas, and I see them across so many different topic areas, and that is super exciting. I'm looking for a magic number of 50 respondents, so let's see if there's 6 more of you out there. If you want to hit enter on your ideas. If I had a Jeopardy music countdown, I should have come prepared and had my little Jeopardy song. That would have been fun.
Do, 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 do.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect.
You nailed it, Liz.
Totally
Thanks, I
nailed
tried.
it. All right, well, I'm going to count the few ideas that we got in the chat. You know, if I count those ideas too, that takes us over 50. So, oh, hurry, hit enter, even if your idea is partial, because Taylor's going to close it. 3, 2, 1. All right. So we'll move on to the next question now. This one is a little more tricky. What we're asking you to do is to please place each of the projects there. There's 4 of them: electric bikes for essential workers, community solar for municipal and income qualified subscriptions, green jobs training, and income qualified home energy retrofits, to place them on that graph. And so the higher you put them, you know, in the vertical, you're showing how much of a greenhouse gas savings impact you think they have. And the more to the right that you put them, the more that you're thinking that they impact equity. So go ahead and grab one of those projects there and place them on the graph.
And they're going to move around as everyone inputs their answers, but we'll be able to take a look at the spread of all the different responses from everyone.
And I guess it's a lot easier for you on the input. You just have to do the little sliders and then it places it on the graph. I'm sorry, my description was for the results, not for the entering of the data. Alrighty. Almost there. Just give it maybe 20 more seconds or so. All right. We'll do the quick countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2. Hit submit even if you haven't finished. Done. All right. It looks like we have community solar with the highest greenhouse gas impact, and it looks like green job training and income qualified home and energy retrofits are closely, neck and neck for an equity impact there. Thank you all. And with that, we'll go to the final question here, which is a little bit different than what we've done so far. This one is a strategy about how we should spend the fund. So here we're asking you, should we save some money up or spend a lot of money rather than the first one on one really big, large scale infrastructure project, such as district energy, neighborhood district energy. And that could take up to a significant portion of the fund, like up to 50%. How much do you agree that we should do that versus not do that? Another question we have is, should we maybe spend lightly in the early years of the climate protection fund to be able to spend it on something bigger in later years? The next one there is like, how much do you think we should spend on marketing campaigns that are focused on education, awareness, behavior change, and so on? And then that final one is, how much do you think we should be, or do you agree that we should be spending funding on small projects of 10,000 or less per organization? Some kind of rapid investment, small investment projects. And we got red in the lead with purple coming up right close behind. Yellow is hanging back and blue is in the back. I don't know, does anyone else have a really good like horse racing voice, that can, you need something like large scale, the big bridge is coming and is leading ahead. And then we got, micro funding is rounding the corner. I don't know. I need better names of the horses, something like that. All right, we'll give you let's do an odd number this time, 17 seconds left. All right, all you Libras out there and Geminis that are still weighing your options, it's time to hit submit. And Taylor, on a count of 3, 2, 1, shut her down. All right, and it looks like significant spending for a large scale infrastructure project is an idea that maybe folks are in support of, but not at the expense of another year's funding. So that's actually really helpful to see and hear. It looks like there's moderate support for microfunding and moderate support for marketing campaigns. Thank you very much for that input. That is incredibly helpful to us. And with that, I would like to stop asking you questions and give you all a chance to ask us questions back. I know you've been sending questions through the chat, and our colleague Johnny has been kind of filtering them out for us, picking out picking out some that are good ones for us to answer here live, and then the rest we will be answering written and posting to our website. So with that, Johnny, can you give us our first question, please?
Sure thing, Sunrisa. I think the first one that came in was asking what does directly benefiting, likely in relation to climate vulnerable communities, mean? And some examples. I know Liz spoke to this a little bit in her response, but maybe wants to clarify.
Yeah, Liz, do you want to go to that?
Sure, I will do my best to answer, and if anybody else would like to add, please do so. So directly benefiting in the way that we've been talking about it means direct investments in communities. So some of our projects might reduce pollution or greenhouse gases in the aggregate, right? It might reduce how much energy we use from a power plant. But if we can actually provide direct benefits in communities, meaning can we reduce pollution locally through transportation investments, for example, or looking at industry and how do we lower industrial pollution and lower energy consumption right in a certain area, that might be helpful in a local community context. Direct benefits could also be things like reducing someone's energy bill, someone's energy costs. We can be looking at data to help inform that. So which neighborhoods, which communities, which households are most burdened, energy burdened today? Do they pay 10, 20, 30% of their income towards their energy bill? And how can we address that at the same time that we're addressing emissions? So direct benefit means, to me, directly benefiting people in their life, in their community in ways that are meaningful to them. So that's what I would say. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that or clarify. But again, I think what you're starting to hear from us is that we're in discussions about this. We have not formalized or finalized the criteria or the specific projects. And so we're very interested in hearing your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would emphasize there is that we really want to hear from communities themselves, what is important to them and what that actually means. And so we will be trying to engage in that conversation.
The next question I'll pull out here, and some of these we've been able to respond to in the chat directly. Others we'll bring up here or we'll reiterate. So the next one was, can the fund provide grants for electrification or infrastructure investments for nonprofits or businesses?
Grace, do you want to answer that or do you want me to take it?
I can answer that, but we have a section on contracting coming up later in the presentation. So to summarize, the fund is not permitted to give grants in the way that nonprofits are accustomed to getting grants. The city can only enter into contracts in exchange for services. And so again, I'll get into that later, but specifically this question was about the upfront costs rather than just providing rebates. That is definitely on the table. We will absolutely look at that as a possibility for the fund.
And can you confirm that electrification and infrastructure investments are likely fundable?
Yes, I can definitely confirm that.
Great, thank you. All right, Johnny, I look to you to see if you have another one.
Yeah, continue to look through the questions. And how many do you want to do?
Just one more is good, and then
just one more.
Mhm.
All right, so looking through these, I think, let's see, do we know what is currently contributing to greenhouse gas emissions in Denver the most? Or what is our current greatest area of weakness in regards to climate change?
So the entire team can probably speak to that. Who wants to take it on first or the most?
Happy to jump in.
Go for it, Liz.
So Denver does an annual greenhouse gas inventory that looks across the entire community. So not just our municipal operations, our government operations, but the entire community to see what is generating greenhouse gas emissions. This is known as a production-based inventory. So it doesn't account for greenhouse gases that might be produced when you purchase something, and the raw materials that were needed to create that might have been manufactured in another state or even another country. But it does look at all the electricity that we use in our homes, in our buildings, in our industry, whether or not the power plant that generates that electricity is inside of Denver's boundaries or outside of Denver's boundaries, all the natural gas that we use in buildings and homes to heat our water and to heat our spaces. And it also accounts for all the transportation fuels, the gasoline, the diesel, even the electricity used by the light rail and the heavy rail lines. So we do an inventory of all of that. About 60% of our emissions comes from the electricity and natural gas used in our homes and buildings. So multifamily commercial buildings, homes, and industrial buildings. And then about a little bit more than 30% is transportation. And then the rest of the emissions are things like the organic materials, the food scraps, the lawn scrap, the lawn waste, the yard waste that we send to the landfill, because that decomposes and it produces methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. So there's some other smaller slices of the pie in the inventory, but by and large, it's the energy that we use in our buildings and homes and our transportation system that generates the most greenhouse gases. And that's true in most large cities, that it's buildings and it's transportation that produce a lot of the greenhouse gases.
And I think it's good to know, because I usually get this question in most public meetings, emissions that are related to food production or the actual food that we buy or consume. Likewise, same with materials, like with clothing or other products that we may purchase. Those emissions are captured wherever they are produced. And so those would be, if they're produced within the boundaries of Denver, we've captured those emissions from the energy use of the commercial facility or other way in which they've been produced. Otherwise, they're most likely part of somebody else's greenhouse gas inventory. So if the food is produced in Weld County, it would be part of Weld County's emission inventory if they did one, right? Or if it was produced in California, for example, would be California's. And then the transportation to get it here, it would be, whatever portion was done in each jurisdiction on its way here would belong to those. We recognize that it's an issue and that it's a significant source of emissions, and that we are kind of the consumer base for that, which is why we had a question earlier that's more related to education, awareness, and behavior change, where we could impact or influence those types of purchasing decisions that impact greenhouse gas emissions that are produced elsewhere. So just wanted to kind of point that out. It's not a blind spot, it's just a different way of approaching it, so that we can avoid double counting emissions. With that, I am going to turn it back, or well, let me say this. We appreciate all of your questions. We see that there's a lot of them in the chat. And we commit to answering all of your questions and having them posted on our website within a week. And so please, by Friday of next week, Thursday of next week, take a look on our website and you can find the answer to your question there if it's not answered live. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grace, who's going to give you the details of the contracting process.
Yes, thanks for that, Sunrisa. And I will also add too that when we come to the end of the actual presentation, with whatever time we have left, we will stay on and continue to answer questions. So now let's talk about this contracting process, which we just alluded to in one of the questions. So as nonprofit organizations, you are probably used to applying for grants. A foundation issues a grant application, usually asking your organization to propose a project idea for funding. You get the funding, you do the project, and then provide a report. Sometimes the funding comes in chunks, some of the beginning, middle, and end. Unfortunately for us, a provision in the Colorado Constitution prohibits the city from providing grants. Everything that we do must be in the form of a contract for services rendered. Even programs that you have seen from the city called grants are still set up as a contract between the city and the organization receiving the funds. We really want you to be successful, so we're going to take a few minutes to explain the contracting process so that you can absorb this information and follow up with questions later. Our office plans to issue RFPs, requests for proposals, in order to award funds from the Climate Protection Fund. We will issue RFPs that ask for a proposal to conduct a specific service. For example, we may issue an RFP to conduct weatherization and energy efficiency work in affordable housing. The service we'll be asking for will require finding residents who want the service, determining what services they need, like replacing appliances, furnaces, and lighting, ordering the equipment, and installing the equipment. Some of that is a job for an HVAC company or an electrician, but recruiting residents is really the hard part and the thing that has to be done first. That's where community-based organizations play a vital role. That's just one type of RFP that we know we would like to issue. Now, that type of RFP is pretty well defined. There will be other RFPs where we will provide you with opportunities to describe how a project idea unique to your community meets the goals of the Climate Protection Fund. We also know that a lot of this work is hard to do and that you need support for planning, scaling up your organization, and perhaps even securing new financial and legal expertise. We plan to allow for all of that in our bids, and we need your input on the supports that you need to respond to these opportunities. Next slide, Taylor, please. Okay, so when your project is selected for funding, we will need to sign a contract with the city's standard terms and conditions. All the solicitations that we post include sample contract language provided by our city attorney's office so that you can review it before submitting your proposal. When we enter into a contract, you will again have time to review the full contract and ask questions before anything is signed. Additionally, you'll be asked to provide other documentation, such as a W-9 and a certificate of insurance. We know that this process can be intimidating, and we want to do all that we can to help make it easier for you. Our office and many other city offices issue all of our solicitations on a website called BidNet Direct. So you'll need to register on the site, but it will send you automatic notifications when we post RFPs and other solicitations. And then that's also where you'll officially submit a proposal. Registration is free. And Johnny's going to drop a link into the chat, which will take you to our bidding opportunities page on our website, where you'll find a tutorial on how to register with BidNet. That's also where we will post links or information about the solicitations we put out in the future. So this is another important link to consider bookmarking so you can find it again easily. And lastly, the way city contracts generally work, first you do the work, then you get paid by invoicing us monthly. We understand that with grants, you usually get some of the funding up front. So we hope to allow for what we call a mobilization phase at the beginning of each project, which will allow us to provide funding for certain activities that are necessary for a project to get started. For example, buying materials and equipment. We have done this with some of our recent contracts where the vendor receives funding upon the notice to proceed. Before they can receive additional funding, they are required to provide receipts confirming that their expenditures align with the scope and work in the budget, scope of work and the budget in the contract. All right, and we're ready for, Taylor, we can go on to the next slide, which is taking us to another Menti poll. And this is my first time reading them. And so I'm looking at our screen and let's see, thanks, Taylor. So you're going to the next one, terrific. So please indicate the type of funding that would be most helpful to your organization. And our choices are general operating funding, staff training, salaries and hiring, programming, planning, and outreach and engagement. And again, you'll see this is a slider, least helpful to most helpful. And now I guess it's my turn to keep an eye on the ticker to see how many responses we have. I see, let's see. Ooh, it's a lot of them are neck and neck, which is so interesting. So operating funds, salaries and hiring, programming and outreach are really neck and neck here. Planning and staff training are a little bit behind, and that's okay. There's no judgment here. All of these polls tonight are just giving us a sense for where you're at. And it's all information, it's all data that we're taking in that we'll incorporate into the plans that we're making with the fund. And I see we've lost some participants. We're at 76 now. So we'll go to at least, let's hope for 45 participants to respond might be great. And I see that the trend is still pretty much on par as it's been for the last minute or so. So Taylor, I can't see the ticker anymore actually, but it feels like we can probably go ahead and close that one and move on to the next. All right, thank you. And now this is an easy one. What's an optimal contract term for funding? 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years? My colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong. The city tends toward 3-year contracts, but we've actually done them for multiple different terms. And oftentimes we have renewal options at the end of a term that can extend the term of a contract. So my screen is partially blocked. Wow, it looks like 3 years is definitely in the lead here. So thank you for letting us know that. Great, we'll give another, again, I can't see the ticker anymore for some reason. Give another few seconds for that and then we can close it.
Yeah, we're at 33.
Okay, and I think those are the only 2 questions we had here.
Yep.
So thanks for that, Taylor. And then once we get back to the presentation, I'm going to turn it back to Liz to take us into our timeline and then on to Q&A. Thank you for those responses.
All right, I'll take us back to the presentation.
Thanks, Grace. So this is our estimated timeline leading up to the deadline to submit our 5-year plan to the Sustainability Advisory Council and City Council. We are required to submit a 5-year plan to both of those entities per the ordinance by early November 3rd of 2021. So you can see here, that's our timeline for the year. As noted earlier, stakeholder engagement is a constant activity in our process. We are drafting the evaluation criteria and need to finalize at least the first iteration of it in order to issue our first RFPs later this summer. We expect to begin dispersing funds in June or July on the projects we mentioned earlier, the e-bike libraries and the community solar program. Awarding contracts to you and dispersing those dollars will follow the RFPs, and we hope that by early fall, some of this money will be in your hands, supporting the work you know is important for your community. We are also hiring program staff to help us execute this work. Johnny will drop into the chat a link to the one job currently posted, and in the future, you will find other job postings on our homepage at the bottom under latest news. Please share these with your networks and check back frequently. We expect to have at least 4 positions posted between May and September. Next slide, please. So that concludes our formal presentation. We will send out a survey after the meeting to get your feedback on the meeting and what areas you'd like more information on. But for now, Taylor, you can take down the presentation. And Johnny, please get us started with our first question.
All right, and thanks everyone who's been putting questions into the chat. I've been trying to keep up, so feel free to keep putting them in there. So one of the first ones that I've seen here, what advice would you give to other municipalities who want to pursue an excise tax instead of a sales tax? And how could we navigate that with Excel?
So as you all know, the Climate Action Task Force that was convened last year had a number of responsibilities, looking at how we can accelerate our climate action programming, how to set science-based goals for our work, as well as examining different options for revenue. So I think this question is referring to a tax on electricity and natural gas usage by customers in Denver on their utility bill from Excel. I think that's what the question is referring to for those of you who may not have that context. So I would refer you, and maybe Johnny, if you can find the link from our website, to the Climate Action Task Force final report recommendations. There is a very significant section of that report that details all the research that we conducted on the different revenue options. So that included the tax on electricity and natural gas, and it included a variety of other options. Ultimately, what the Climate Action Task Force recommended and what was referred to the voters was this sales tax increase, which funds the Climate Protection Fund. So that's what we're talking about here tonight. And if you are interested in those recommendations on some of the other revenue options, the report has a lot of great information and background.
Thank you very much, Liz. The next one, I think some folks were looking for clarification on the decision-making process for how the money will be spent. Is this CASR internal decisions, SAC votes? How are those decisions made?
Sure, I'll take that. The ordinance that created the fund does charge our office with managing the fund and making those decisions, so that it will be our office that will be issuing RFPs and writing contracts. So that does fall to city staff. But as Sunrisa discussed during the section on stakeholder engagement, we absolutely plan to have discussions, consistent discussions with the Sustainability Advisory Council, as well as with formal and informal stakeholder engagement opportunities, not unlike this one, to get input on the types of projects that should be funded. And so I think that for us getting started, that's the first most important step, so that we know that the types of projects that we are asking for and that we're looking to fund are what the community want to see. Now that, of course, that's specific to the types of projects that we're going to pursue through the RFP process. But remember earlier, we also talked about the fact that this fund can also support city and county of Denver projects, and those we will be making decisions on with our colleagues. Undoubtedly, there will be community input that will have influence over those as well.
Thank you so much, Grace. Question here, can salaries or labor expenses go to residents of an area that might want to participate in a neighborhood project? If not, what is a qualified labor expense? For instance, only private and commercial contractors.
I feel like I might want to read that question to see. But I guess the question is, if you're looking at it from an application perspective, what are all the different types of activities that you can receive funding for? Labor, yes. Labor to do projects, I think undoubtedly could be something that is funded.
And I think trying to read between the lines here, specifically, can the labor be local people in a community hired by, say, that community organization to do the work, or does it need to be a more formal private contractor or something like that? Are there kind of labor restrictions?
I feel like I want to pull in Liz on this one too, but I think again, it's going to depend on the work, right? So if the type of work that is being done can be, you can hire whoever is needed to do it. But let's say, for example, if the work requires an electrician, you need to hire an electrician. If you can hire an electrician from your local community, there's no reason why this fund would weigh in on that one way or another. Liz, I don't know if you wanted to make a comment related to workforce development.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been working really closely with our Office of Economic Development and Opportunity over the last 6 months or so, as well as with some national experts on high road jobs and workforce and career pathways. And so we envision developing some language for our RFPs that would support, I think, and if you remember back to the earlier slides when I was talking about workforce as an allowable use, that would support paid pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship training programs, other kinds of programs to engage people with barriers to employment, youth and others in these career opportunities, paid training opportunities, right? We want to be able to support good quality wages. And we also are talking about labor standards, and we haven't defined yet what we are considering, but labor standards can be a wide variety of things. It can be community-based benefits agreements, community benefits agreements. It can be wages. It can be a number of different things. And so we are definitely looking at that as part of our RFPs, not just under the workforce category specifically, but for other expenditures on projects where there is an infrastructure component or some kind of construction component, making sure that we're investing in programs that are good for people and also achieve our, climate and pollution reduction goals.
Great, thank you, Liz. Question here, how is the SAC and CPF thinking about addressing water management and conservation?
That's a really good question. So the word water isn't specifically mentioned in the ordinance or in the allowable uses, but that doesn't mean that we can't address water. I think it very easily fits in with community adaptation and resiliency. And so that's at the very least, it could definitely fit in there. And I think that's something that that's on the list of the many things that we have to work on and define.
And then a follow-up question on that same topic asks about, well, planting trees are very important in terms of heat mitigation and having a carbon capture and sequestration type effect. But how does that get balanced with the increased need to water those trees in the environment that we're in? How do we think about that? How do we weigh those in our decision making?
That's such an excellent question. And Liz, if you don't mind, I'm going to toss it over to you. We talk about this one a lot.
Sorry, I was trying to respond to a follow-up question about the earlier question about workforce in the chat. So this was about how do we balance adaptation, water needs, and how that impacts energy demand?
Yeah, so just thinking about that balance of the climate benefits and heat island effect that can be achieved through more urban tree canopies, but the watering needs for that green infrastructure. And how do we balance those things?
Yeah. Okay, great question. So this actually came up, if you all remember, the Green Roofs Ordinance, and then the process that the city went through to update that to the Green Buildings Ordinance. We did analyze the amount of energy required for the additional water, the pumping and the processing of that water. And there is a greenhouse gas impact to that. But relative to the savings that might be achieved through greater efficiency, through green roofs or cool roofs, it was negligible, it was very small. So what we would have to do with any project that we're funding is to do an analysis, an impact analysis to see, is there a significant benefit to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, to reducing air pollution, or an adaptation or resiliency benefit? And we would have to weigh that against any potential, negative impacts of that policy or that strategy. So we would have to look at that holistically and see how those things are balanced. But because the fund is not only focused on mitigation, but it's also focused on adaptation and resilience, I think we do really need to consider what our key risks and vulnerabilities here in Denver are. So urban heat island is absolutely a part of that, and the increasing temperatures. And so we will need to come up with strategies to mitigate for that, trees being one of them. So I think it's about balance, and it's about understanding the impacts and optimizing the project so it has the best impact from that perspective. The forestry department in Parks and Recreation in the city of Denver has looked at different trees. We don't have a lot of native trees because this was prairie, right? So there's native cottonwood, but there's not a lot of other native trees. And so they're looking at trees from around the world, the steppes of Argentina, for example, to see what kind of trees might grow in our current and future climate that are drought tolerant, that can tolerate the extreme weather that we have here, so that we're using, we're optimizing the water that we would use towards trees. And trees are actually much better than lawns when it comes to the cooling and the benefit compared to the amount of water use that we would need. They do use a lot of water, obviously, but so I think we would just have to analyze that and see what all the benefits are, and also talk to the community and see what they need and what they want in their neighborhood in terms of adaptation and resilience types of investments? Is it trees, or is it something else from their perspective?
Thanks, Liz. This next question actually falls into my wheelhouse. So if Excel is committing to 85% carbon-free electricity by 2030 and 100% by 2050, why do we need to install our own solar arrays? What role do these community solar gardens play? I have my own answer, but curious if Denver has a good statement on this. So feels like a test. Distributed generation is extremely important and going to be complementary to everything that Excel is doing with the utility scale electric system. And we are a part of that system. So the more that we can be directing investments in clean energy infrastructure locally, the more that we can create jobs here, reduce the utility bills for our municipal operations and for our residents and businesses, and achieve other co-benefits such as increasing the resilience of our facilities or helping income qualified members of the community save on their bills. In the case of the community solar program, we're prioritizing locations where we can do covered parking in municipal parking lots at public facilities such as rec centers, which will help to address that heat island effect. It also provides an opportunity to co-locate electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and in the future might be an opportunity for us to deploy batteries or other storage infrastructure so that we can increase the resiliency of those facilities in the event of outages. So I think there's a lot of reasons for us to do this, and we continue to evaluate, what's the best role that Denver can play in enabling a affordable and reliable and ultimately carbon-free electric system, not just in Denver, but a part of the bigger system that we plug into. Great. Next question is, how do you foresee coordinating local projects and programs with initiatives at the utility, state, or national level?
I can take a stab at that. So I think that we're constantly in dialogue with regional, state, and national representatives of government, as well as NGOs and other organizations. So we are part of a lot of peer networks with other cities as well. We learn a lot from what leading cities all across the country and around the world are doing to combat climate change and make our communities more resilient. So we plug into those networks quite a bit for learning, for exchange, for pushing each other and trying to advance the work. And in terms of how we are thinking about our work, this is a really exciting time because we have the ability to invest our local funds, and we're also now starting to see the potential for really significant investments at the federal level. So we are keeping a really close eye on what's happening at that federal level to make sure that we're prepared for that money. And we're trying to lay some of the groundwork because we know that when federal dollars come in, big dollars, it's kind of like a fire hose and you're trying to do that work really quickly to get the money out the door. But you want to do it in ways that are equitable. And so we need to start building those relationships and partnerships now so that we're prepared when those dollars come through to activate the relationships that we already have in place. And so that we can make sure that the dollars are providing the maximum benefit and that we're actually really achieving the equity goals that we have as a vision and a goal and a North Star for ourselves. So I know from experience, sometimes that can be really hard because you don't always have those partnerships, and then you get the money and then you're trying to adhere to all the federal regulations and all of the requirements of that funding. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned that many of us have had from, past experiences working on big federal grants that we will take with us. And then we're very active at the state level. We're active at Air Quality Control Commission rulemakings. We are talking with a lot of the other entities that intervene. We have a local government coalition here in Colorado that we engage with to advocate for, very aggressive climate action at the state level. So we're trying to keep in sync with all those efforts, I think, and trying to figure out how our fund can really be additive to existing efforts and really advance the work in meaningful ways and do it in a way that is as equitable and beneficial for our community as possible.
Thanks very much, Liz. And in terms of coordination with the utility, we do have our Energy Future collaboration with Excel Energy, where we work monthly across 6 different program areas, actually very similar to those aligned with the Sustainability Advisory Committee and our CASR kind of work streams on renewables and building decarbonization and transportation electrification and resilience and reliability. And to help put things in perspective for people, Excel Energy, it takes about $2 billion a year of ratepayer funds to run the electric system in Colorado. And that's compared to our $40 million climate protection fund. And their transportation electrification plan that was filed this past year and just approved by the commission is over $100 million of investment over the next 3 years. And their energy efficiency programs, they spend about $100 million a year. And they're looking at expanding their renewable program options. So the more that we can influence those dollars that are available and have a good relationship with the utility and really push them to do more and do better, and then add our funds on top of that to increase equitable access or identify those other high impact areas where we can make a difference. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to coordinate that we have been doing, and we're excited to be able to expand upon those efforts. The next question here, I think Taylor, could be a good one for you. Is CASR already planning anything for expanding the Sustainable Neighborhoods program or something similar with faith communities, schools, or other communities?
Sure. So I think I saw that it was Joan that posted that question. Love you, Joan. Love Sustainable Neighborhoods. For those who don't know what it is a certification program for Denver neighborhoods. So residents get together, apply to join as a neighborhood. I see a couple other Baker folks and Highland folks and some of the Sustainable Neighborhoods crew. We have not built out the program in recent years. Part of my work plan for this year is to really take a hard look at the program and who is involved, who we're serving, how could we build it out to be more equitable and provide more opportunities for all kinds of neighborhoods to participate. For those who participate, it is a very volunteer-based program. So we need to really help incentivize and provide more resources to neighbors to work on the projects that are important to them. We've learned a ton from the folks who've participated in Sustainable Neighborhoods. I believe some of the best ideas have come from residents. You guys are living in your neighborhoods, you know each other, you know what the issues are, you have your own individual passions. So yeah, I think we want to build upon that momentum and make it grow bigger, have a wider reach, involve more people, and overall just make it a powerhouse program. So, woo!
Taylor, this one I'm going to try to rephrase a little bit. And Mike Salisbury, if you're on the line, this might be a good one for you. Folks are asking about reducing transportation emissions, and one possible option being increasing housing density. So, what are some of the things that you're thinking about? Has this come across your team before? And what are the high impact things that you all are thinking about in terms of our transportation plans?
And introduce yourself, Mike.
Sure. Thanks,
Sorry.
Johnny. Thanks, Grace. My name is Mike Salisbury. I lead transportation energy work in CASR. So a lot of my focus has been on electric vehicles, electrified mobility. I work very closely with our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, also in their work around mobility. So biking, walking, transit, how we can support those efforts as well. A very good point about housing density. There's a lot of research out there on climate, and density is really one of the most impactful things that can be done. So it's a really important strategy that we want to pursue. I think I saw your question like the idea of maybe there's something we can do with incentives to encourage ADUs, I think you mentioned. So there's definitely things we could do in that space. But I think it's a great example of what we want to hear from the community, because those are really important ideas. And also it's a big policy question as well, like how the city looks at zoning and things like that. So we definitely want to keep on getting input from the community and making sure that, we're not just pushing on incentives, but also figuring out how we can make policies as a city that are going to move us in the right direction as far as, density and things like that. But I think I'll just say we're really doing like all of the above on a transportation front. So really looking at mobility, getting people to drive a lot less, figuring out how to electrify those remaining trips to make those as clean as possible, then thinking about those underlying transportation land use issues as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. And folks, I'm running out of questions here in the chat if there is anything else you want to hear. So this is kind of the last one that I have teed up. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit and so ask it like this. How will CASR ensure that this funding will be successful in reaching and supporting the communities where historically equitable access to resources has not been fair? Or how will CASR assist community-based organizations with navigating the RFP process and developing successful proposals?
Well, and I see that Sunrisa went off screen. Sunrisa, are you still with us, or are you able to field that question? So I think it speaks directly to the community engagement.
Yeah, I'm
here. There you are. You're in two places. I'm sorry.
I'm in two places. Yeah, I was having two screens here so that I can keep eyes on everybody. Basically, watch out what you're doing. I'm watching you. Yeah, I think the answer to this is a couple of things. One is that, we're city government, and as a government as a whole, right, we haven't always had the best history of engagement with community and making sure that we're in partnership all the time in all the best ways. So I think our first real effort that we're trying to do is get in much better step with all of you and with other organizations that are out representing and doing the good work across the city. And so that's really important for us first. And that represents some of the efforts that I explained earlier with the Sustainability Advisory Council, with some of my efforts that I'll be doing to reach out and, quite frankly, conversations like the one we're starting here today with all of you. And I just see the co-chair that I have for our committee that I'm leading, or not leading, but supporting the community adaptation, resiliency, and environmental justice is here. Kira Jackson giving a little wave, raise the roof for her. For example, Kira's out there with the Montbello Organizing Committee, and she's been working really close with Mike on electrification of vehicles and EV car sharing and how to modify the efforts that we were starting in that project to something that is closely aligned with the needs in the community. So I think the better that we are working closely with organizations and community, the more that we can tailor programs to specifically address their needs. And the more we can shape RFPs that our office will issue to be ones that are aligned with those needs. And then hopefully some of these dollars can get back invested in organizations like yours, organizations that are close with community, to make sure that solutions are ones that make sense on the ground and not just in our cubicles with our Excel spreadsheets and things like that. So I think that is a big point of what we're trying to do. We take wholeheartedly or take to heart that mission of social justice and equity. And we know that it's not just a what, but it's a how. And that we really have to commit to a process of achieving equity to get those kinds of outcomes. And we're working on educating ourselves on the why, and making sure that we're aligned with the why and the values and the principles behind that. So what I can tell you is it's going to be a process, and it's going to be something we're going to be doing over time. And we are wholeheartedly committed to it.
Excellent. Thank you, Sunrisa. Not seeing any other questions come in. I hope I've done a good job articulating everything that came through the chat, even if I had to rephrase some of your questions a little bit. I think we are very open to more questions. Feel free to reach out to our team at any time. I will be kicking things back over to Grace and the others to wrap things up, but thanks for the opportunity to moderate this session with everybody.
Thanks, Johnny. And if you wouldn't mind, would you please put our email back in the chat at the bottom so nobody has to go looking for it again? So thank you. There are more questions, obviously, but some of those are more complex and we need a minute or two to actually get through those and provide some thoughtful responses. And so as we mentioned earlier, every single one of the questions that's been put into the chat will be answered. We will post the Q&A to our website. And again, it'll be that Climate Protection Fund page. And Johnny, why don't you go ahead and put that one in there too. So we'll get that up there within a week. The slide deck will be there as well. And the recording of this meeting, of this informational session will also be there. And so again, what we also mentioned earlier about the Sustainability Advisory Council, I do recommend go take a look at it. We have all of the members listed there, not their personal contact information, of course. But again, if you would like to pose a question to them, if you would like to submit an idea for them to debate and deliberate and discuss, use that sustainability@denvergov.org email and we'll provide it to them. So please use that email as frequently as you like. Send us more questions. If there was something that you think about later, you wake up in the middle of the night and remember, go ahead and submit that to us. We really appreciate the time that you've given this evening to join us. And we hope that you will have some new ideas generating, that you'll be inspired and be getting your organizations ready for when we have RFPs out later this summer. And the last note that I would add is this will not be the last time that you hear from us. At the very least, every time we have a request for proposal issued that is geared specifically for community-based organizations and nonprofits, we will offer what's called a pre-bid meeting. They're optional. You don't need to attend in order to apply, but we will host that in this type of forum so that you can learn more about the very specific information that we're looking for or proposals that we're asking for in each one of those RFPs that come out. So Liz, Sunrisa, Taylor, anyone else have anything else to add this evening?
I just wanted to touch on the grants piece. I think there were a couple comments of just like concern about it. I know that you talked about this earlier, Grace. This will also go in the Q&A to just make it a little bit more clear. What we can do with our RFPs and with other funding options from the city is we can shape some of the criteria and some of the things that we're asking for in ways that are very similar to a grant program. So I don't want people to feel like this is going to be wholly different than what a grant program could look like. It's just that because of those legal issues that Grace brought up earlier, we can't sort of give funds to private entities without it being connected to some sort of service. So that the mechanism is really a contract for services. But how we evaluate, what criteria we put in the RFPs, the way that we shape them, what we can fund, whether that's, as I mentioned, it can be paid training. So it can actually cover, salaries for trainees, for staff to do some of this work. It can cover a lot of the things that we've been discussing. So I saw some concern in the chat just about that. And I just want you all to know that we are thinking we're being very thoughtful about how to craft the RFPs so that we have criteria that are geared towards organizations that have cultural competency, that work in community, that do a lot of the kinds of things that you might expect or think about when you're thinking about a grants program.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks, Taylor, for getting us through the technology, and Johnny for moderating. Liz, Sunrisa, Mike, thank you for chiming in. And again, thanks to all of you for giving us some of your time this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.